In Shevi'i of Parshat BaMidbar, we begin the series of descriptions of what the Levim do vis-a-vis the Mishkan, and specifically about the movements as Am Yisrael travels through the Midbar, the movements of the Mishkan, because the Mishkan has to be moved along with the people. And we come first to the work of the family of Kehat. And so, Dasoet Rosh B'nai Kehat, Mitoch B'nai Levi, L'mishpachotam L'veit Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe v'Aaron Limor, Daso Esra, and so on and so forth. And Zot Avodat B'nai Kehat Bo'el Modesh, Bo'el Moed, Kodesh HaKadoshim. They deal with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, we would then expect to be told what exactly they're supposed to be doing, especially in the transport. How do they get it ready for transport, and so on and so forth. And then we find pasuk after pasuk after pasuk, where Aaron and his sons, right, Uva Aaron Uvanov, when the Am Yisrael is traveling, and they take apart whatever has to be taken apart, and they get everything from the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim. They get the Aron HaEdut, they get the menorah, they get the Shulchan, and they get the Mizbach HaKtoret, Mizbach HaZahav. They get it all ready, and they cover them, plus they cover all the various vessels that are used in the avodah of these objects, and only then, after everything has been covered up, only then, right, in Pasuk Tet Vav, V'chilo Aaron uvanov l'chasot et HaKodesh, after they've covered it all, the Kol Klei HaKodesh, Achrei chen yavo b'nei kos l'aseit, v'lo yigu el HaKodesh shomesu, right? They just carry. They don't take it apart. They don't, right? And not only that, there's a special parsha at the end, a special unit at the end. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe v'Aaron le'mor, specifically, Al tachritu et shevet mishpachot kati mitoch haLevim. Don't destroy them. What's going on? How could they be destroyed? V'zot asu lahem v'chayu v'lo yamutu. When this you must be very careful about, such that they are able to live. So when the Gishtam el Kodesh HaKadoshim, when they get near, when they come to the holy objects, Aaron uvanov yavo v'samu otam ishi shalavodatov el masa'o. They have to be instructed. Everything has to be done before, readied by Aaron and his sons, and they have to be instructed. And finally, the parsha ends, v'lo yavo lirot kivalat hakodesh v'metu. But they must not come to see when the Kodesh, when these holy objects are being covered up. They're not allowed to look at the holy objects. Now, the meaning of Kevalah, Beit Lamed Ayin, you could look at the Mefarshim, and you'll see that it could be one way translated or another way, but the bottom line of this is they're not allowed to see. They can't have the slightest peek at these objects themselves. Everything must be covered. What's going on? What's the issue here? The issue perhaps takes us to the wider issue of the Mishkan. After all, the Mishkan is the movement, if you will, of Har Sinai through the desert. Har Sinai is when the Torah was given. So what is it that we see when the Torah is given? The Torah being given is 8 kol. I'm reading back in Parshas Vayisro, Parak Yutet, Pasuk Zayin, Vayavo Moshe vayikra lezitneam vayasam lifnei kol dvarim elu asher tziva. Moshe tells him all the dvarim that God has said concerning the receiving of the Torah. Be ready on the third day. And there is a specific a number of specific mitzvos, but a special one. V'igbalta ta'am saviv leimar. He shamru lachem alot bahar nagaya b'katzeu. Do not approach the mountain. Do not touch it. Do not go up on the mountain. Kol hanogea bahar mot yumot. Again, just like the Bnei Kahat are warned, like they should not touch, right? They should not see, right? So the Bnei Israel, you can't touch the har. Nogea b'katsehu, hanogea b'har mos yumot, lo tiga bo yad, ki sakol yisakel, and no hand should touch the mountain, right? Like the Bnei Kos, the Chilar Aaron Uvanov back in BaMidbar, l'chasot et HaKadosh v'el et kol klei HaKadosh bin so machne ve'achrein yavo Bnei Kos l'seis, to carry, v'lo yigu el HaKodesh v'mesu, right? V'lo yigu el HaKodesh v'mesu. So, what is happening? Back to the Aseres Hadibros. What is it that we really see at the Aseret Hadibrot? So, Vayerid Hashem, back in Yisrael Parak Yutet, Vayerid Hashem Lar Sinai El Rosh Hahar, Vayomer Hashem Al Moshe, right? The Gam HaKohanim HaNegashim L'Hashem Yiskadashu Pen Yifrot B'Hem Hashem. Okay, the mountain is surrounded by a fence. Vayedaber Elokim Eit Kol Hadvarim Ha'ele Leimor. What we, quote, see are the Dvarim. The Dvarim are the words. We hear the voice of God, and we hear the words of God, and we hear the sound of the giving of the Torah, which is described again in Parshat V'Eschanan, in Perek Daled Dvarim. He shomer lecho shmor nafshecha me'od. Am Yisrael is warned to guard themselves. Do not forget et hadvarim asher ra'u einecha, the dvarim that you saw at Har Sinai. Upen yasur milvovecha kol yemei chayecha. Do not forget it. And what is it? Yom asher amarat lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev b'mar Hashem elai hakel li etam. The day that you stood before God. Vatikrivun vatamdun tachat ahar, you came near, you stood at the foot of the mountain. V'har boer bo'eish alev hashamayim, the mountain was burning with the fire. And what is it that you saw? Vayedaber Hashem aleichem mitoch ha'eish kol dvarim atem shomim. You heard the sound of dvarim. You heard the presence of God. You experienced u'tumuna einchem roim, but you saw no form, no shape. Zulati kol. You heard, you experienced, right? That's the dvarim. That's the dvarim. It's the experience of Sinai. But it is not to be objectified. And here, objectified means to turn into an object, because the central point of Matan Torah is Anochi Hashem Elokecha Lo Yilucha Elohim Acherim Al Panai. It's against Avodah Zarah. It's against the objectification of any other power as a power aside from God. They are powers created by God, yes, but not to be worshipped. It is the statement of contra what we call Avodah Zarah. Now we know, and the Avodah Zarah becomes in the mind of those who worship it, and you see it throughout Dvarim, the destruction of idols, the destruction of forms, beautifully stated in the Rambam in the first parak of Hilchot Avodah Zarah in Sefer Hamada, how beginning In the very beginning, those people who worshiped the stars thought they were worshiping God, but soon the stars become objectified, and then the objects become represented by other things, and in the end, there's the worship of the physical object, and God has been forgotten. No one knows, as the Rambam puts it, both in the guide and Mishnah Torah, the awareness of God, the awareness of presence. Certainly Matan Torah is about specific details of laws of what we must do and what we must not do. But it's about something else. And according to the Ramban in Dvarim, that something else is not a mere catalog of items, of 10 items. It is the story of, it is the living experience of the presence of God, the revelation of God. And that sense of presence was experienced in a specific place. But the place of it is not what you should be running toward. Don't go up on the mountain. In the end, the mountain is only a mountain. In the end, the Jews could say, oh, we'll worship this mountain. No, the mountain is only relevant because something happened there, and the happening is the presence of God. And the Mishkan continues that. So, the danger of looking at those items, of touching and looking up those items that have the designation, particular designation of truly the utmost holiness, is very great. So I would say that in the same way Am Yisrael is warned not to go up on the mountain, not to objectify the mountain, so too are the people who have to deal with it warned. And the Bnei Kahat, the Levim, are not enough to deal with it. Aaron and his sons, only they can prepare. Only they can understand this. After all, it is Aaron and presumably his sons who know the danger that even after the Torah is given, the people's need to objectify it in some way is a dangerous and real issue, because only a short time afterwards they want an Egel HaZahav, probably beautiful, probably inspiring in some way, but it's Avodah Zarah, and it puts them right in the slippery slope, and worse, into the denial of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Lo Yeh Lecha Elokimach Elohim Acherim Apanai, and that is to be avoided at all costs. And so, Lo Yiru, there is nothing to see in the objects that is allowed to the Bnei Kahas. And if Aaron and Banav do not cover it up so they do not see, then they are endangering the Bnei Kahas. In this sense, I want to share with you, since BaMidbar comes out before Shavuos, so that we're not late after B'chukosai, the parsha of Shavuos. I want to share with you a Torah, or a small bit of a Torah, in the Kedushas Levi of Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev in his Sefer. And the first Torah that he has on Shavuos, he has a very strange beginning, and I'm not familiar with any other Torah that Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev begins in this way. To understand this, you have to know that Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev was a Chassid, and in the early Chassidim, his great Talmud Chacham, and he became the Rav in, we know him as Berditchev, but he started out in Pinsk. Pinsk, as it turns out, was the hotbed of the Misnagdim, of the opposition to Chassidus. So Reb Levi Yitzchak, for various reasons, was run out of Pinsk, and he became the Rav in Berditchev. But he begins the Torah on Shavuos, Nishtalti b'mdinas Lita. When I was in Lita, in Lithuania, I was asked, Mipnei ma nikra Chag HaShavuos b'shem Atzeres. The Torah calls it Shavuos, but Chazal call it Atzeret. The only time we have the word Atzeret in connection with a Chag is on Shmini Atzeret. So the Reb Levi Yitzchak says, Veishavti bishlosha ofanim. I answered in 3 ways. I can see the picture. He's asking, and perhaps he understands this is a challenge against Hasidus in some way, that there is a undercurrent of something going on here. So he answers in 3 ways, and I can see he answers it 1, 2, 3, right? The first answer is a classic Litvische answer. It almost sounds like it could be a Brisker Torah. And in fact, I saw the answer independently in the Chazon Yechezkel of Reb Chatzkel Abramsky, certainly a great gadol from the Litvaks, okay, who gives the same answer. And then he has a middle answer, but I want to get to the third answer. Ofen HaGimel. He says the third way that I answered was, he says Beis Ramban. The Ramban says on the pasuk, Mato iru, mato oru et ha'ava ad shetechpatz. Don't stir up the love until there's a desire, until there's a chayfetz. So the Ramban says, this I believe on the Rosh Hashanah, Piresh K'shemagiel Adam Eze Hitaurut Shel Yira Ve'ava. When a person is greatly spiritually on a movement towards God, okay? As I take it from Miyad right away, Yireh Lasot Lo Keli, he should in some way make a keli, objectify this feeling, objectify this tremendous sense, this tremendous emotion, right? What does it mean to objectify it? It doesn't mean to build a, right? Chas v'shalom, an idol, right? It means Hainu Shiyasa taketh a mitzvah. Do a mitzvah. That's how we objectify feelings. We want to act it out. We want to live this feeling. We want to create a something real out of this. And of course, you have the model, the experience at Sinai, and the tremendous hitorut, the tremendous passion, right? And what can we do? So we could do the mitzvah, but wait a second. The no mitzvos. The mitzvahs are going to be given now. Hainu shiasa tekevez a mitzvah. Hainu shitain stoko yeshiv take lilmod kedoma. The Rebbe Levi Yitzchak gives examples. You have, so give tzedakah right away if you have a hitarut about the presence of God. Act in a godly manner. Help somebody or learn Torah. Right? So the problem is, that's what Ramban says, you have to make it into a chayfetz. In Lithuanian terms, make it into a chetza, objectify it in some way. The gavra, the person has to objectify it. The problem is ki chayfetz hu miloshen keli. A chayfetz is in Hebrew the sense of a vessel. And he says, Ad kan Lashono, I've until now quoted the Ramban, Af shein ze Lashono mamash, even this is not his Lashon. In other words, I could see Reb Levi Yitzchak quoting the Ramban. He says, but I might not have the quote exactly right, but he's quoting the Ramban. So he says, he goes on, Reb Levi Yitzchak, based on this Ramban, problem is, B'shat Matan Torah, at the time of Matan Torah, Am Yisrael was Hitorah Gedola, but they had this tremendous passion, this tremendous hitorut, but they shum mitzvah, but they had no mitzvot yet. Lasot, lihitorut, right? So what was the only thing they had as a mitzvah? Muchrach lomar, so it's necessary to say, shoyu mekaymi mitzvahs hagbala. Yes, they did have a mitzvah in connection to Sinai. It's before. They wanted to rush forward to, as it were, hold on, be in the place, and God gave them the mitzvah of Hagbala. There's a gvul, right? Those who have been in Israel know that there are signs, right? Zihirut, be very careful. Hagvul, lefanecha. Stop, right? Atzor. On the buses, atzor, stop. It means to stop. Shehizir Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Hashalom shaloli ga bahar. Vehem hayu netzarim. They were held back. Miliga. And mi mitzvah hazeh hayo osim keli litarut. And this was their keli of passion. Yes, but we're not going to go to run up onto the mountain. We're going to respect the boundaries because that is what God wants from us. Sometimes what God wants us is to do nothing, is not to rush forward, is not to say, but I must see these holy vessels. I need an objectification. Just not objectifying in the way of a physical object, whether it be the Aron, whether it be the menorah, whether it be Har Sinai. Mata iru, umata oruru et ha'ava, ad shetechpatz, and in Har Sinai the ad shetechpatz was not to go forward, to live in a world in which all you have is not to do something because you've been informed by the Spirit of God. That's what God wants from us, right? And how do you know? Because you've experienced the Hitorut, you've experienced the presence, you've experienced the revelation of God, which is nothing, no thing, nothing. As God, if we can say anything about God, we say that God is no thing. Chag Sameach for those who are going to listen to this before Shavuos, and for those who don't. Ad shetechpatz mata iru mata oru hit orut. Objectify it in some form of mitzvah.